Hey all, welcome to A Fistful of Dice. My name is Matt. In this video we're going to be expanding upon a concept that I introduced in my D&D Races High Elves video, which I'll link down below. And the idea is that of the Abzu, or a progenitor race which spawned orcs, elves, and humans. What I was trying to do was come up with a logical explanation for why elves, humans, and orcs were all able to breed with one another, producing viable offspring, and none of the other races were. So I came up with the concept of orcs, elves, and humans being a ring species, meaning that they've all evolved down different paths and progressed differently, but they still possess enough similar genetics to breed with one another. So the way I see it, the Abzu was a culture that existed millions of years ago, so far back that they're legendary. A lot of people aren't aware of them or don't believe they existed, and maybe they don't, but the more learned and educated people of the world kind of agree that this is the most viable theory, and based on some of the evidence that they've uncovered, they believe that the Abzu were at some point real. So no one really knows what the Abzu looked like or what their culture was like, but it's theorized that they looked most similar to humans, because the humans are the closest to the Abzu as we have nowadays. So at one point, millions and millions of years ago, there was an event known as convergence. Essentially, the way the planes work is right here you have the prime, or material plane, which is where we all live. And then you have the Feywild, which is a mirror image of the prime, or material plane. However, it is overrun with wild arcane magic and fey creatures. And this is where, fairy creatures come from, satyrs, all of that stuff. And then below the prime plane, you have the Shadowfell, which, like the Feywild, is a mirror image of the material plane, but it's overrun with negative energy. And it's basically a dark shadowland overrun with undead. So at one point, this event called Convergence happened, which meant that all three planes merged into one chaotic plane. The magical energies crashing into one another reshaped the world itself. It was just untold destruction. Wars raged, billions died, and the world was basically remade through all of these magical energies sort of slamming into each other and reacting with one another. Through the course of all of this chaos, some Abzu came into contact with the wild magic of the Feywilds. These Abzu became the Elves. On the other hand, some Abzu came into contact with the negative energy of the Shadowfell and became the Orcs. And then there were the Abzu that managed to cling desperately to the logic and the realness of the prime or the material plane, and these Abzu would come to become known as humans. It's unknown how long convergence lasted, but based on the geography and studies that have been conducted, it's theorized that it lasted for centuries. When the planes finally split apart again and balance was restored, the world was not the same. The Abzu as they existed were no more. In its place were three different races: the elves, the humans, and the orcs. All of them at one point Abzu, but through centuries of exposure to these different latent magical energies and progressing down different paths, they had begun to look very dissimilar to each other. The Abzu, known as elves, took to the forests and the wooded places of the world to further seek the wild magic that had shaped them. The orcs, fearing the sun, fled to the caves, where the cold embrace of the shadows, very similar to those of the Shadowfell, awaited them. And the humans kind of stayed where they were, establishing their cities along riverbanks and along the coasts. Eventually, these three races would spawn a dozen sub-races of their own, different breeds of orc, different ethnicities of human, and different sub-races of elves like wood elves, drow, and moon elves. And after millions of years, these three distinct sub-races progressed farther and farther apart, until, aside from being mammalian humanoids, didn't really resemble each other anymore. But that genetic piece of their code that at one time made them all Abzu still remains, and that's why they're able to produce viable offspring. So that's kind of how I see it. an interesting take, I think. Let me know what your thoughts are on this, or if you have a different explanation for why certain races are able to breed with one another and certain races aren't. I sort of like this idea because it combines sort of the theory of evolution with magic did it, which is, your go-to explanation if you're creating a world and your players are like, how does this work? You just go, magic did it. So it's kind of a fun combination of those two ideas. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think. That's going to be all for me. Take care, and happy gaming all.